This story is titled, My Uncle's Fortune Came with a Riddle, and it tore our family apart. My uncle's garden gave its wealth to anyone clever enough to split it, promising our family untold riches. Garrett's garden, though, wasn't full of roses or fruit trees. It was a black goat that somehow birthed millions in tech money back before anyone even knew what cryptocurrency was. While the rest of us scraped by, sweating in the fields or maxing out our credit cards just to stay afloat, Garrett was living like royalty. 7 bedrooms in his mansion, a wine cellar stocked with bottles worth more than most people's houses, and a garage packed with cars so expensive they could swallow my yearly salary in one gulp. So when Garrett died suddenly at 52 from a heart attack, we hoped, no, expected, his fortune to be donated to some obscure charity. Better that than him handing it over to the family that spent decades treating him like a criminal for daring to succeed. But then his attorney summoned us to his office and read out the strangest will we'd ever heard. To my relatives, who only call when they need money or want someone to dump their sad little lives on. I give you one chance to prove you're worth more than your string of failures. Break my puzzle. Steal everything I've built. If you fail, every last penny will burn in flames while you watch from the street. Each of us was handed a sealed envelope stamped in wax with Garrett's monogram. Inside was a riddle. Where shadows dance but give no light. Where loneliness screams all night. Where memories linger but time stands still. Find the key to my final will. At first, we acted like a real family, working together, brainstorming ideas. Patricia, my wife, swore it pointed to the old darkroom where Garrett used to spend hours developing photos. Dylan figured it was his own office, where he sat for days in total darkness, coding away at his computer. I was sure it had to be the wine cellar buried under the house, stocked with bottles worth thousands apiece. Finn thought it meant the dusty crawl space under the whitewashed porch. For 3 weeks, we tore through every inch of Garrett's mansion like feral animals. We flipped through his untouched art collection, tugged at hidden panels behind pricey paintings, and ripped up Persian rugs, checking under floorboards until our hands were raw and bleeding. We pored over every book in his massive library, desperate for a hollowed-out compartment. We even drained his swimming pool to check for secret chambers. We found nothing. And that's when the family unity snapped like an overstretched rubber band. Patricia hired a private detective at $800 a day. Dylan tried bribing the housekeeper with a $1,000 tip to spill Garrett's secrets. My mother started sneaking into the house at 5 a.m., claiming she needed quiet time to think clearly before the rest of us arrived. Finn? He went full spy mode, installing hidden cameras throughout the mansion to track every move we made, like we were thieves, not family. But the real chaos began the morning Patricia found something she wasn't supposed to. She was rifling through Garrett's master bedroom for the 100th time when she stumbled on a loose floorboard beneath his massive bed. Underneath was a metal lockbox stuffed with old photos and what looked like a second will, signed in Garrett's unmistakable hand. Patricia didn't call us like we'd agreed. Instead, she slipped it into her designer handbag and tried to act like she hadn't found a thing. Unfortunately for her, Finn's cameras caught every second of it in crisp high definition. The next morning, he confronted her in front of everyone gathered in Garrett's marble kitchen. Patricia tried denying it, until Finn pulled up the footage on his laptop. We watched her go from smug to pale to utterly defeated in under 30 seconds. "Hand it over," Mom demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "I found it fair and square," Patricia shot back, her tone icy. "Possession is 9/10 of the law." That's when Dylan finally snapped. He grabbed Patricia's $1,000 purse, ripped it open, and dumped the contents onto the floor. The lockbox clattered on the marble like a breaking bone. Photos and papers spilled everywhere. We froze, staring at the neat handwriting on a note that sent ice water through my veins. "Only one of you deserves this fortune. The rest of you will get exactly what you've earned." It wasn't signed, but every one of us recognized Garrett's script. The same elegant lettering he used for birthday cards, cards that always came with a crisp $100 bill because, let's be honest, he was never great at real connection. We sifted through the photos, snapshots of places from our childhood that we hadn't thought about in years. The old pool house where we spent one last summer before Grandpa died. Garrett's first dingy apartment above a pizza shop, where he taught himself to code. The county fair where he worked one scorching summer, saving every dime for college. But one photo made Patricia's hand shake so badly she nearly dropped it. It showed an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, the same place where Grandpa used to tell ghost stories whenever a storm rolled in. He wouldn't, Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh, he would," Finn said grimly, snatching the photo from her trembling fingers. Patricia looked like she'd seen a ghost. Garrett was terrified of that place after what happened there, she said. He swore on Mom's grave he'd never set foot in it again. Dylan turned the old key over in his palm, inspecting the scratches along its surface. This lock's been used recently, he murmured. The warehouse is 43 minutes out of town. According to GPS, it sits on 15 acres of land that's been in our family for generations. We piled into a black SUV, packed in tight like kids on a field trip, but the tension was so thick I could barely breathe. Nobody spoke on the drive, except for my mom quietly texting her boyfriend Randy about what this inheritance could mean for their future. When we pulled up, the warehouse was exactly as I remembered it. Rusty metal walls, windows long since shattered, and the sharp smell of mildew clinging to everything in a 4-mile radius. The only difference? A brand-new steel deadbolt glinting on the front door. The key turned with a satisfying click that echoed across the empty parking lot. And inside? We stepped into something that shouldn't have been possible. The warehouse had been completely renovated, gleaming concrete floors, insulated walls, industrial lighting overhead. In the center of the vast room sat an antique wooden table with 5 chairs arranged in a perfect circle. On each chair lay a manila envelope, our names written in Garrett's perfect, taunting script. "This is insane," Finn muttered, but he couldn't stop himself from walking toward his seat like a man hypnotized. I picked up my envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, more personal, more threatening. "Before you face your final test, here's one truth to shatter your illusions. Choose wisely what you value most, or join me as a ghost of warning." And then, as I read the confession tucked inside, my stomach churned and my hand shook so hard I could barely keep hold of the paper. 17 years later, Dylan said softly, his voice carrying a strange weight, like the beginning of forgiveness. But before any of us could respond, my mother did something I had never seen her do in my entire life. She took responsibility. "No," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. She pushed herself up from her chair and walked to the center of the room. "I need to own this too." She stopped in front of the largest camera, facing it squarely, and for the first time in decades, I saw her stand taller, not out of pride, but out of regret. "My name is Rebecca Tan," she began, her voice trembling but strong enough to push through. "And I failed my son in the worst possible way. When Patricia told us Garrett caused Dylan's accident, I should have asked more questions. I should have listened to Garrett's side instead of assuming he was lying. But I didn't. I chose the easy story. I chose to believe one of my sons was a hero and the other, a monster who couldn't be trusted." Her voice cracked, and her lips quivered, but she pressed on. "I picked comfort over truth. And Garrett paid for my failure as a mother for the rest of his too short life." The camera's little red light clicked off. For a few long moments, the warehouse was silent, except for Patricia's muffled sobs echoing faintly, mixing with the sound of passing traffic from the highway outside. Then Finn laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and bitter, the kind of laugh that comes from someone realizing their entire life has been built on lies. "So, what now?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Do we all just go home and pretend this never happened? Go back to our sad little lives?" "No," Dylan said firmly. He stood straighter than I'd ever seen him, his voice carrying a strength that silenced the room. "Now we do exactly what Garrett wanted. We tell the truth, even when it's ugly. We stop protecting the ones who don't deserve it. We start being the family he should have had." 6 months later, Patricia used her inheritance to launch the Garrett Foundation, an organization offering legal aid and counseling to kids falsely accused of crimes they didn't commit. The foundation's first big case involved a teenage boy expelled from school over a fabricated accusation. Patricia fought for him harder than anyone expected, like she was fighting her younger self, desperate to undo what she'd once set in motion. Dylan donated his entire share to expand the foundation. "Money won't bring back my relationship with Garrett," he said, "but maybe it can stop other families from making the same mistakes." He started therapy too, speaking publicly about childhood trauma and what it's like to grow up as the family's black goat. Finn used his inheritance to enroll in law school. He wanted to work for the foundation, but only if you promise to keep Garrett's mission alive, he told me. "Some family traditions need to be broken," he said once, looking tired but determined. "And some are worth starting fresh." The next morning, I drove to Montana. My car was loaded with camping gear and enough supplies for a week. The address led me to a secluded property near Bozeman, nestled between sprawling mountains. The main house was a massive wooden cabin, its frame dating back to the 1920s, with additions tacked on over decades as families grew and prospered. I slipped the yellow key into the door. It turned easily. Inside, the cabin felt like a museum of a family history I never knew existed. The walls were covered in photos spanning almost a century, faces of ancestors I'd never met, reunions that took place before I was born, and countless pictures of Garrett at every stage of his life. But these weren't the stiff, formal portraits I remembered from home. These showed Garrett laughing, working on his computer, chatting animatedly with an older man I didn't recognize. In the middle of the main room sat a table carved from a single massive tree, polished so smooth it reflected the soft glow of the lights above. Atop it was a leather-bound journal and a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, it means you've chosen truth over comfort at the moment it mattered most," the note said. Garrett had written about our family's patterns years earlier, about the lies, manipulations, and betrayals that passed from one generation to the next like an inherited disease. As I flipped through the journal, my stomach twisted. Our grandfather, the man we'd all admired for his stories and adventurous spirit, had once abandoned a wife and daughter when he was only 23, leaving them to start over with a new family like the first had never existed. Our father? He covered up a drunk driving accident during college, letting an innocent classmate take the fall and serve 2 years in prison. Our mother? She embezzled funds from her employer to save our house and shifted the blame to a coworker who was fired and blacklisted from the industry. Garrett uncovered these secrets as a teenager, helping Dad fix an old computer. He found hidden files documenting everything, proof of crimes and quiet cover-ups that left real people shattered. It was then I understood why Garrett had been treated like the family's black sheep. He wasn't dangerous because he was bad. He was dangerous because he refused to lie. When Patricia spread her false story about Garrett causing Dylan's accident, it gave our parents the perfect excuse to paint him as untrustworthy, a villain whose every word could be dismissed. They were terrified of what would happen if people believed him. At the bottom of the journal, Garrett had scrawled one last entry. "I could have cleared the names of the innocent, but I stayed silent. I didn't want to lose the only family I had, even if it was built on lies. I hope you'll have the courage I didn't." Taped to the last page was a phone number. "Call this if you're ready to finish what I couldn't." My hand shook as I dialed. "Miss Tan," a woman's voice answered on the first ring. "I've been waiting for your call. My name is Detective Rodriguez. I worked with your uncle years ago." She explained that Garrett had come to the police once with his evidence, hoping to make things right. But statutes of limitation had passed for most of our parents' crimes. Still, the victims were alive. Martin Espinoza, the man imprisoned for Dad's accident, was now 63 and living in Oregon. Louise Chen, the coworker Mom framed, was 58 and barely surviving in a care facility. Detective Rodriguez gave me their contact information and relayed Garrett's final request. "Use what I left behind to give these people back what was stolen from them." She said it. I whispered to myself as I left the care facility, my mother's voice still echoing in my head. "I'm sorry." From there, I drove straight to my father's memory care unit. When I found him, he was sitting in the recreation room, working on the same half-finished puzzle he'd been arranging and tearing apart for weeks, never remembering that he'd done it all before. I placed the police report from the hit-and-run in front of him, and for a moment, just a flicker, I saw something stir in his clouded eyes. A spark of clarity broke through the fog of dementia. "Martin was a good boy," my father said suddenly, louder than I'd heard him speak in months. "He didn't deserve what happened to him." And just like that, for a few precious minutes, he remembered. He told me about the night of the accident, how he'd been drunk, driving home from a party, when he struck Martin's bike. How he panicked and fled, then returned hours later pretending he'd simply stumbled on the scene. "I knew he was innocent," my father said, his voice hollow. "I watched them arrest him, and I didn't say a word. I even visited him in prison, thought if I was kind, maybe it would ease his sentence somehow. But the spark faded as quickly as it came." My father went back to his puzzle, humming softly, forgetting the entire conversation. It didn't matter. I'd gotten what I came for, confirmation that Thomas's evidence was real. Proof that our parents had knowingly destroyed an innocent man's life. For the next 6 months, I worked with a legal team to track down every person our family had harmed. Thomas's journal had been meticulous, filled with references to small betrayals, co-workers fired after false accusations, classmates bullied into silence, neighbors ostracized for questioning the family's narrative. Every phone call I made felt like surgery on my soul, cutting away pieces of the identity I'd built around being part of a good family. But each conversation also brought a little healing to people who'd carried shame they never deserved. The most surprising call came from Patricia. "I found something in Garrett's house," she whispered. "It's in the wall, behind his bed. You need to see it." I drove out to Garrett's estate, now quiet, nearly empty except for Patricia's careful cleaning as part of her charity work. She led me to the bedroom. Behind the headboard was a hidden compartment, and inside lay dozens of letters, one for every family member. Letters he'd written but never sent. I wrote these on nights I couldn't sleep. Garrett had pinned on the top sheet. The letter addressed to me began, "I saw you trying to tell the truth when you were 12. I saw how your mother silenced you. I want you to know I trusted you, but I was too afraid to speak up and drag you into the same isolation I lived in. You didn't deserve that." Dylan's letters were filled with medical research and words of encouragement, support Garrett had wanted to give but never could. I tracked your physical therapy progress on Mom's Facebook page. I found experimental treatments that might help with your chronic pain, but I couldn't reach out without causing more family drama. The letters to our parents were the hardest to read. "I forgive you for believing Patricia's lies," he wrote to our mother. "I know admitting you were wrong would have meant facing your own failures. But your choice to see me as dangerous made me grow up fearing my own capacity for violence." To our father, he'd written, "I know about the hit and run. About the embezzlement. Thomas told me when I was 18. I spent my whole adult life asking whether I inherited your ability to destroy innocent lives or whether I could choose to be different. I chose to be different. That choice cost me my family." The final letter, dated a week before Garrett's death, was addressed to all of us. "I'm dying from a heart condition that could have been treated if I'd had a family to encourage me to see a doctor. But I'd grown so used to being the family's problem that I ignored my symptoms until it was too late. I don't blame you for my death, but I want you to understand, isolation kills, no matter the disease. This isn't about my inheritance. This is about giving other black sheep the support I never had. Some stories are meant to end. Others are meant to change. Choose what's better for your children." Patricia and I sat in that empty bedroom, crying not just for Garrett's death, but for the relationships we could have had if truth had mattered more than comfort decades ago. 2 weeks later, Thomas's lawyer called me with one last request. Thomas had purchased property in Montana and built a retreat center for families fractured by false accusations and generational trauma. "The buildings are ready," the lawyer said. "They just need staff and programs. Thomas hoped you would consider running it." He asked for it to be named the Garrett Thorne Center for Family Justice. I moved to Montana 6 months later. The center officially opened in January, offering week-long programs for families brave enough to confront their dysfunction and heal. We provide therapy, mediation, and legal advocacy for people working to rebuild lives destroyed by lies. Patricia visits often, sharing updates on the foundation and stories of families we've helped. Dylan earned a psychology degree and joined as a trauma counselor. Finn enrolled at Montana State, helping build our legal advocacy program. Our mother passed quietly in her sleep last winter. Her final words to a nurse were, "Tell Martin and Louise I'm sorry." We held a small memorial and donated her remaining savings to the foundation. Dad's dementia has progressed. He no longer remembers us, but the nursing staff say he often asks about a boy named Martin and wonders if he's okay. Last month, Detective Rodriguez called with unexpected news. "We've reached a breakthrough in Louise's case," she said. Her former employer agreed to issue a public apology and provide additional compensation. "Your foundation's work inspired other companies to review their own histories. We've already uncovered 17 more cases where innocent employees were framed to protect the guilty." Louise, now 71, has become an advocate for our center, helping others her age clear their names after decades of undeserved shame. Martin, at 65, used his own retirement fund to start the Second Chance Foundation, scholarships for ex-convicts trying to rebuild their lives. "The hardest part isn't prison," Martin told one of our family groups recently. "It's 40 years later, wondering if people can still see your criminal record on your face." Both Martin and Louise said knowing the truth, even this late in life, brought them more healing than therapy or compensation ever could. And then last week, another envelope arrived, this time hand-delivered to the center. Inside was a photograph of a young woman I didn't recognize, standing in front of a house that felt vaguely familiar. On the back, in Garrett's handwriting, it read, "Her name is Emma. She's my daughter. She's 22 now. She spent her whole life waiting to meet her family and waiting for someone to tell her why her father never called." Below was an address in Portland and a phone number. "Tomorrow, I'll drive to Portland." Some family stories don't end. They just wait for someone to write the next chapter. When Emma answered the phone on the first ring, her voice trembled. "Is this about my dad?" she asked before I could even introduce myself. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm your cousin." And there's so much I need to tell you. The cycle ends with me.